Hey folks, this is Tully and welcome to some more game dev. We're coming back for part 2 of our stream. What did we do? We did skill items, right. So today we're kind of focusing on skill items, which is basically items that are going to gate the player's ability to buy their skills until they have the correct item. Think Final Fantasy X Sphere Grid. And we got most of this set up in the first stream. We kind of did a little bit of maintenance on the item system, hadn't really touched it in a long time, technically at all for this particular project. And so we got that working, and we got it so that we can do pickups, which we hadn't really played with in a while either. And we ended up gating the skill nodes on just a single item for the time being. I think I'd like to see about making it so that there are a variety of items, one for each stat at the very least. Right now we just have this crystal shard item, and if we come over here and reflect at the pool, we can see we have 2 crystal shards down here, but we have 0 skill points. So if we walk over and attack this slime, we'll get a skill point and level up slash, and then we can come into here, level up slash, and spend our 1 skill point and 1 crystal to unlock that node. Again, I'm not sure whether or not design-wise this is a good idea, but I'm just prototyping, and I kind of been thinking about this system for a while, and I kind of want to just see it in action, because I kind of flip-flopping on whether this is going to be good or bad from a player standpoint. Like, is it going to be fun and interesting, or is it going to be tedious and annoying? So we're just going to build it, and we're going to see. So I do want to look at variety of skill items. Do I want to tackle that first? The other thing that I had wrote down as things I'd like to do today is item drops from enemies. I think I want to prioritize that, because the idea of like adding data to each skill node such that specific skill nodes need specific types of items is not going to be hard. I don't even think we need to add new data entry here. We can just look, is it a stat node? Sure, what type of stat node is it? Defense, okay, look for the defense stat node item name. I think that there's a way of building that where it doesn't even require us to change anything in the actual like data structure, and we can just like use the existing information to determine which items to use. But that's mostly going to be a fair amount of data entry and busy work. So I'd like to focus on the dropping items, because I think that's going to be a little bit more fun for me personally. If we still have time at the end of the stream, then we can look at setting up the multiple items for each stat. So items dropping off enemies. The starting point here is that we already have the functionality I want in an interactable like tile object. This thing here, we're able to walk up to, hit interact, and we get to pick up that item. I think I'd like to start with that. I think it'll be easily adaptable to make it so that it's a walk on to the tile that has the item to pick it up as well. But I'd like to make it so that at the very least we begin with essentially the enemies dropping an object like this that we could walk away from, but if we walk up to, we can do an interact and pick it up. So how do we make it so this thing can drop when an enemy dies? First step is, what is this thing? How does this work? So this is an interactable tile, or an interact tile. This thing is getting referenced in part of our generate level data. So when we go to save the game, basically we save out all of the tile information, everything that's related to a specific tile, into one big scriptable object asset. Basically we store it, and it looks like we're just storing that information inside of that tile data interact, as well as in the tile data prop loader. So there's actually 2 things that are happening here. It's actually not just the interaction, it's generating a prop and the interaction system. So we've kind of got to do both, and they're going to be 2 different things, but from a player's perspective they'll be the same idea. They see an object, they interact with an object. Okay, so let's start with just the interaction part. We'll get that working, and then we'll figure out how to spawn a prop separately. Yeah, I want to focus on this part first. So we'll get it to the point where we can have the enemy drop an interactable that you won't be able to see. There'll be no visual information, but you'll be able to interact and pick it up. So where does this get used? Inside of the actual tile, we look at the interact data and we spawn an ability. Very good. Okay, so all an interact really is a specific ability being placed on a tile. So let's say it is this interact ability. Where does that end up going in the end? Ooh, okay. It gets set on the interact ability variable. The tile currently can only have a single interact. That may be problematic. Because if... well... if the enemy can stand on the tile, then I guess it's fine. Minimize too far down. No, this is going to be interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Let's work through it, and we will see if this becomes a problem. I anticipate that it will be. But there might be multiple ways of solving it. So we spawn in based off of the tiles interact data, which there can only be one interact data as well. We set an interact ability. So what we need to do is we need to dynamically, not just at the moment of load, change a tile's interact ability by doing the same load. Okay, let's break this out into its own function. So we're gonna take all of this section, I think. One level less. We're gonna grab all this and we're gonna refactor this out into its own method. We're gonna call this spawn interactable. Now, by default, it wanted to grab the tile data. Is there a reason that it needed the tile data opposed to just interact data? I'm not seeing a reason. So if instead we were to go in and grab the data structure core tile interact data, and we were to do interact data and proceed to replace everything in here with this instead, I believe oh, that's neat. Just select and tab. Still getting, at some point in the last few weeks here, I upgraded to Visual Studio 2022. I'm still getting used to some of these different kind of functionality things, because we were on 2019 for the longest time. I'm 5 years behind the times. Okay, so given an interact data, we should be able to spawn something that then sets the interactability of that tile. So if we could get a tile, call spawn interact with this information, even if it's at runtime, it should still update. Now, there is a little bit of weirdness of this being an addressable async call, which means that it may take a moment for it to appear and be interactable, however long the load is. But I'm not super concerned by that. Maybe I should be. Okay, well, I'm going to give this some more thought. But let's just get it working and see what the latency is on this. Because we might need to find a way of like pre-spawning the enemies interactable and then just like setting it at the moment the enemy dies. Okay, problem solving before the problem has actually presented itself again. So this needs to not pass in the tile data now, but instead the interact data. And I guess the next step is going to be finding the enemy to actually try and call this information. So let's look at knocked out status effect. So this is a status effect that applies to an enemy when they die. I'm wondering, on notification, we do send out, no, that's just a direct call. We do send out a notification of the death. Who listens for this right now? This object. A lot of different things. The player director, for example, the AI director. These all have on death notifications that I assume are just removing the enemy from the turn order queue, essentially. There's a display if alive component. Okay. I'm wondering if it makes sense to add a behavior to the units. So in here, we have most of the information that makes up an actual unit. We could add another behavior, another unit behavior for item drops. And that behavior would listen for on death, and then on death it could get the unit's tile. There's a quick thing we do need to check. When do we remove the unit from the tile? Because at some point on death we clear the unit from the tile, and I need to find where that happens. Because depending on the timing of that, here. If the current tile is not null, clear its information. Interestingly, though, does this ever get set to null? Equals null, or equivalent to null. Current tile space equals space equals target. So the moment that the unit is placed is when we set it, but we never set it to null at any point. Interesting. So even though we set the tile's content to null, we don't actually set the enemies or the unit's tile to null. So the unit still knows the last tile it was on. Perfect. This is what I was looking for. Assuming that it isn't being set somehow in a way that I'm not seeing, we should be able to get the death notification and still be able to access the tile the unit was on and spawn the object there. I'm going to... I think it shouldn't affect anything if I move this down. I'm going to have this clear happen after we send the death notification. Just checking the train of, or the call stack of logic to see if anything would care. No, this is just removing the unit from the list when it dies. Same thing here. Death flag. This doesn't care about the unit, or the unit's tile. And then the display, none of this matters. And then Combat Character Manager is a very old class from Era of Embers, so I think we're fine to move that. So that's just an extra safety precaution. The order of those shouldn't matter, and by moving this down, we'll have a little bit of extra security that when the notification is sent, the tile won't have been cleared. So next, we need to create a new behavior. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It's just basically a mono behavior with no other logic. Visibility is a bit complicated. Weapon. Oh, we had a concept. Man, it is always like archaeology. We had the concept of spawning a weapon. We were playing with a kind of early prototype of infinite retries where the enemies would drop different weapons, and then when you picked up the enemy's weapon, you'd be able to gain their abilities, and then it would have a certain amount of durability, and after those made durability, after you use its abilities so many times, it breaks, and then you'd go back to using like your fists essentially, and then once you kill the next enemy, it would drop another weapon. And trying to see if there was some sort of like you know, killing the enemies in the right order in order to be able to grab their weapons in order to use their weapons against them kind of gameplay, but ended up going a different direction. But this system technically spawns a weapon. Oh, and we were directly using walking onto the tile to claim the weapon. Yeah, this is a bit too hard-coded for my likes, given our whole ability cutscene system we've built now, which is much more generic. Why is all of this on the player? Spawn weapon. Oh, because this is for spawning the weapon in the player's hand. Yeah, this is when we were playing with 3D models before we went sprites. Okay. Yeah, this system was super hard-coded. So this was just, there was a specific tile weapon on every tile that would just get set. Yeah, super prototypey. We should clean some of this up at some point. Yeah, this is not how I want to do it now. I would like to have it instead so that we have... know why I'm looking for one. We can just create a basic one. I'm just so used to copy and pasting sequence steps to get like the base functionality. So this can be item drop. Loot. In here, we can now add loot to the enemy. And then loot is going to need a string ID. For now, we'll just have it be a single object, but we may eventually want to have a list of objects with probability. But for the time being, we're just going to say that this is going to have drop ID. Skill node 1. Okay, so that'll be what we drop. Next up, we need some sort of initializer. I guess that is something I need to check on here. How do we initialize these normally? Do we have some sort of init call? We do. These all happen inside the unit, I think. The unit does a initialization somewhere? Oh, it's in the player beta state object. This thing is handling the initialization for the time, and because we're talking about the enemy, it's the AI. So we're going to do get component loot. I'm going to make a init call. It's going to take in the unit. Unit, munit. We're going to definitely store that. And then we're going to want to track the death. So in the same way that the death flag is, we'll use that as an example. Maybe? Well, it's doing a think. It's a bit confused. We'll minimize Visual Studio, let Unity refresh. See if that helps. Seems to have. Still can't go to these locations. Let's go manually. Defeat flag. Okay. Now we don't need any of this logic. I guess we want to double check. No, that shouldn't matter. Find references. Yeah, that fixed it. This doesn't even use the information that it gets sent. It just like loops through and checks to see if anything's dead. Same thing here, it's not using the sender or the arguments. Same thing here. Seems a bit odd. I feel like I should be able to check. Yeah, arg0 should tell me which unit died. I guess it doesn't matter because when we send the death notification, when we post it, we send it with the owner. And because we're subscribing to the notification, this ad, oh, this one does care. If we add M unit, now we should only hear this if the sender is specifically my unit, and then we can just assume that the unit I'm associated with has died. Should work. I sound uncertain because I'm not really sure. Doesn't look like we do this anywhere else, but we do post it with info being owner, and we override sender to owner, which is this unit. Yeah. Okay, so this should work. Yeah, so we can be, because we add this extra parameter here, unit, it will only call this function on death notification if the unit is the same one as the one posting the notification. So as long as the units match, we'll get the correct death. So this means that on that unit's death, we can just use the unit we have stored as a reference to get the current tile and then spawn interactable. Oh wow. Can we just do, rather than doing drop ID, can we just do an interactable data? Interact data? Core tile interact data? I guess that kind of just works. Then we don't need the drop ID. Huh. I don't know if I like this because it kind of bakes it into having to use the interact, and I might want it to be a more complicated data structure. But this should work for testing it. So it'll take the interact data, and then spawn an object the same way it would normally. Okay. So if we come into here, select this as reference, let's go to this inspector and lock this information. And then let's go look at mini slime. Technically, I'm going to need to do this for every enemy and set up their loot, but that's not really that crazy. Each enemy probably should have its own loot setup. So now we copy all of this information across. And again, our first step here is just getting it so it loads. Our first step is just getting it so it loads a chest exactly the same way as the set static one on the map, except now I've come to this field and I am not sure what to do with this information. So the flag is being generated at the moment that we start the game. That may not matter. What happens if we leave the flag data unset? How does this interpret that? So in interact data, it does not check. It currently just assumes that there will be a flag ID. Does this thing internally check and care? It does. Okay, so this is technically checking. There might be a more efficient way of doing that, but that's fine. So if we don't have the flag set to a valid ID, it just won't do anything. Okay. And the reason we have this flag is so that we know that the player has interacted with this specific chest, so that we can disable that chest from spawning in the future. Right? Because that's what the required flag stuff is doing. In theory, it is. No, that can't be right. Because we don't have a required flag set here, and earlier we were testing in the previous stream, and we reloaded the map and the chest didn't respawn. No, it must be... No, it's only ever being used for set. Does this ever get auto-populated? Yes. It should be. If generate flag is true, it should be populating that information. Which it is. It's populating in the prop loader. It should be populating inside of here as well. If we go back into the scene, move something so that we can save, hit this breakpoint, required flags should be getting updated. But it's not. That's this one. There's some repeated data here because of the way I'm doing this, but this one I am expecting should be changed, and we're not seeing that. I'm going to just change this to like 4 and then save again. should be setting it back to 5. Should be setting some interact. Yeah, it sets it back to 5, but this doesn't get set. Okay, so there's a bug with this system, but it should be doing this for me automatically. Not sure why it's not, because I'm very clearly seeing that it is doing that in code. Tile data. Oh, there's two different things. There's the tile data and the interact data. Oh, I see the problem. So it's doing it internally, but not updating so this tile data is the actual data we're using in the game. Interact tile is the object that we're viewing. So it is internally adding a flag. We just don't get to see that it's doing that. This is going to cause problems. Yes. Should be fine. Yeah, internal count is 0 because we cloned it. But now it should visibly show us what's actually happening. Maybe? Yeah, now it is showing the correct information. I'm going to add that breakpoint back in to make sure that the internal data is still correct. So the internal data, yeah, now has 2 flags. So that is a problem. Because it takes the cloned version that already has it and then adds it again. Okay. Okay, so we can't see it in the current setup, but if the flag ID is set, it's automatically adding a required flag to it that is matching. And that required flag is being used to say, hey, if I've picked this up, don't pick it up again. Just going to double check to make sure this is correct. 0, and now it has 1. Okay, so we're back to a good state, even though that state is slightly confusing. So if we leave this empty, inside of Mini Slime's loot setup, then no flag will be set. but I think this is just for respawning it when you exit and enter the map. In this scenario, nothing is telling it to respawn unless the player has died, or sorry, the enemy has died. So I don't think we need this for drops specifically. So I think the flag ID can be left blank. Now the prop entity ID is a different story. That is going to map to a specific prop that we want to turn off. It does look like it can be empty, and that would also be fine. So we'll start here with that also being empty here. And then walkable seems right. Yeah. Okay. So now, if we go back to loot, this will call spawn interactable data. It'll come in here, it'll create an ability, it'll say this is the item we want to spawn with this amount. It'll make sure that the required flags are valid, which in this setup there are no required flags. It will set up the set flag, which again there's no flag to be set. There's no prop ID, so it won't do any of that. And it'll change that prop to be walkable. And then set the interactability ID. If we're going to make it walkable when we interact, we need to also set it to be a wall so you can't step when you spawn the interact. Okay. So now if we walk up, kill the enemy, specifically the mini slime because it's the only one with the loot set up, it should spawn an interactable that we can interact to get 2 crystals. It won't spawn the prop, so we won't be able to see it. And I think our interact system only updates when you step onto a tile. Every single one is going to need loot. For now, we're going to just do that, which is basically an inline null check. I don't love using it because I don't know how it works with some of my build stuff, but we'll replace it eventually. Or more accurately, we'll add loot to every single enemy. Once we add it to every enemy, then we won't need to have that inline null check. Okay, so now if we walk up and we defeat this enemy, it should have spawned an interact, but it only updates our interact data when we step on a tile. Yeah, so when we step away and step back, now it detects that the interact is there, and we can see crystal shard was found. I'm surprised that worked exactly how we wanted it to. Yeah, we had it set to 1. Okay, so we got 1 interact. Couple of things. When do we update that interaction? Is there a way to force the interact to be updated on the player so that it knows the loot is dropped immediately, so we don't have to step away and step back? Here, when we place a unit on the tile, we try and get the forward direction. Yeah, so we basically just need to do this. We need to do this on the enemy's death. So we could add it to the same notification that says enemy has died. But the problem is we don't know the order. So how can we know that the interact has changed? I don't see a good path. Yeah, I don't see a good spot where we could notify it. Like, we could add a notification inside of here. No, I don't need to do that. It's even simpler than that. Sorry, I'm just doing a bit of cleanup as I try and think about this. So this will only cover the death of the enemy. Technically, if you change maps, we'll start to get a memory leak where we won't be clearing these observers properly. I'm probably doing that in a lot of spots. I might have to do a full pass on this. We also might not want to be actually doing it the way I did it either. This technically seems nice, but we're removing this observer midway through what I believe is a for loop. as we've been looping through all of the notifications, so I don't think we want to call terminate or remove inside of its own function. Okay. Sorry, I'm still trying to think about how we notify the user that the interacts have changed. I think there's a more fundamental flaw to the system too, because currently we have like a clear right trigger call that we do that like removes the interact from the player's queue. Like when you do the interact, like the whole system seems a little like there's something slightly off about the way it's currently working. And the fact that I can't think of a good solution implies to me that it probably could use a bigger look. Okay. Let's move on for now. Other than some small cleanup, I think this is okay. We're gonna ignore the fact that we have to step away and step back to do the interact, partly because I think I might prefer having it so that this isn't even an interact in the long term, and instead it just gets added to the tile as a on-enter ability, which we can have multiples of as well. So there's less of a problem with this whole setup, but let's see if we can get the prop loading part working. So we have it so loot is spawning the interactable, but that's only half of the equation. We also need to spawn a prop data, which prop data spawning is done here through load props. Which, given some prop data, it tries to load that addressable. I think this could also be refactored slightly. Like, this is taking in the ID and the callback. And then the callback is just getting used here. And that makes this function look very clean, but it's not helpful for this one. So I'm going to refactor this, extracting it out as load prop. Do you need this? I don't think this needs to return anything. Interesting little refactor. I don't think we care about returning the entity ID. Maybe there's a reason why it did that, but I don't see it. Okay, so now we have a function called load prop with given a prop data and an entity ID. Oh, that's neat that the entity ID isn't even part of the prop data. That's cool. So we can load a prop and give it an ID at the same time. That's kind of just handy how that worked out. And that's with tile. So then if we go into loot and we give this a... This is going to be super hard to do because it won't have our custom UI for it. Is this even correct, actually? Yeah, no, it is. Prop loader data. Okay. So if we have a prop loader data, technically we should be able to also do spawn. It's an internal call. We just do that, and then we have to do this. This should give us hopefully a unique ID for this enemy. And we can give its loot a specific name. Tie that loot to the interactable and to the prop. And now these things should be connected so that when you do the interact, it should turn off the prop. There's some assumptions being made, but I'm going to just believe that's how that's set up. Yeah, this gets super wonky because we don't normally edit it in this raw form. Normally we have a more complicated data viewer that lets us kind of spawn props. So let's take an example of center. Let's do decor steel chest. When we spawn that, if we show metadata, what does that data look like here? That was center, right? That was the center object. Let's alt. Is it alt? Control? I'll manually collapse them all down so that we don't get confused. Okay, and if we look at center, this should be a prop loader data, but even this looks different from... Yeah, that looks different from the slime setup we have here. Oh, because it's even more abstract than that. It's not even the information that we show in the editor. This is what the editor information gets converted into that the game actually uses. Yeah, so even looking at the raw setup here, this still technically isn't enough to go off of. Okay, so if we come into here, we can kind of make some educated guesses. I'm going to assume offset is this and this. We can say that the direction is north. It should have... Oh, we're looking at the wrong one. Prop addressable ID. will be this. -2. -2. It is a billboard. No cast shadows. Entity ID can be default to nothing and required flags can be entered to nothing. So I just want to double check this offset actually, because I think that would be the only thing that's slightly confusing. Generate level data from world data. Prop loader data. X, Y, and then pixel height for Z. Okay. So in this situation, pixel height is 0. So that's fine. So I guess it's not that bad. It's just this, the direction, which by default should be north, and then the type of prop, which in our situation should mostly be billboards. I could see a world in which we might want decals sometimes, but for the most part, it should be billboard. So it's really just these three and making sure these are set to their default values. Okay. The other question is, what is this unit's entity ID? And does it have one? When we set these up, we do have mini slime spawn as its entity. I believe that should be the entity ID that gets created and added to the unit at runtime. So the prop should get mini slime spawn underscore loot as its entity ID. Failed. Failed to get the entity. Order of operations thing. I'm not seeing any entity setup stuff here. I'm pretty positive we set up the entity to be used as part of the manager. We initialize it. This is for the flag. The AI state beta has an ID associated with it, which is whatever the entity ID is. Oh, but we don't actually set up an entity. Okay, that's fine. So this ID should be what we need. Is that public? It is. So I guess we can just do this. Still no? Because we need to do get component AI beta state, because that's the thing actually doing the setup here. I don't like this. I don't like it. Sure. Shouldn't be any null references on the loot data. Yeah, no, that should be fine. Okay, does it load? Yes. Okay. Then if we kill this slime, does it spawn a chest? Yes. If we walk away and walk back, we can get the interact. It does not find the entity ID for that prop. Okay. So it did set mini slime spawn loot in the correct location for the interact. But it did not add the entity correctly. Minimized too many times. Okay. So if we come in here, select this object. Take a look at steel chest. None of this has an entity ID associated with it. This has something to do with the quick refactor. So the prop data needs to have an entity ID. But we also create an entity ID. Why do we have this lower one? We set all of this up. We set it here and then we use it. Oh, I see. This is a default setup. So if this string ID, if this one's null, then we set it to this, aka the default setup, which is the position that we're placing it on. So if I don't specify an ID for a prop, but this literally says don't go in here. This was literally saying if we don't find an entity ID, continue. Weird. It feels like I set this up to have default logic, but then just missed this one if statement. Okay. Default entity ID based. I don't need to say based off tile data. It's pretty obvious. And we can have multiple props on the same location. I'm thinking about it and I feel like this shouldn't work at all. Because so many props don't have entity IDs. I'm going to be a bit crazy. We're going to go all the way back to before we did the... new method. No, this was this. This was set up the same way. Oh, this is an and, not an or. Okay. If required flags are not valid and this doesn't have an entity ID, don't load it. Okay. Okay. So... why? This is saying if the required flags for this prop to spawn are not valid, so this is not a valid... this prop shouldn't be spawning. And it does not have a default ID. Okay, I know what this is for. This is for props that we want to toggle off if they're not valid. This has to do with the bridge setup. I added this for the bridge setup. I'm just struggling. This comment is insufficient for reminding me why this does what it does. So this flags, if the flags are not valid and it doesn't have an entity ID, then skip it. Don't load it. However, if its flags are not valid and it has an entity ID that is valid, then spawn it regardless of the fact that it doesn't have any valid flags, or that its flags are set to an invalid state. And that's because I want to control it via the prop. I know why I added this. I know when I added this. It wasn't that long ago, but I can't fathom... are not valid, and this does not have an entity ID. Don't load it. Yeah, I'm gonna just move forward. I'm trying to figure this out, but it doesn't really matter because it is working as intended. It's just very confusing. And it's because of specific edge cases with manipulating props via cutscenes. Yeah, it's fine. Okay. Unsatisfactory, but we're going to move on. So this is all fine. This entity ID coming in here, though, doesn't... like... still doesn't make a ton of sense. Because I would think that if we have a default entity ID that we're passing in, we should be able to get here. I don't know why it having an animator matters. Like, the solution to this, to move on with our lives, is that we should be doing prop loader dot data dot entity ID is also equal to this. And then this doesn't even matter. This could be blank for all we care. And because it has a proper entity ID, when we get into the spawner, it should just get here now. I'd like to understand why it's set up the way it's set up, because it feels broken. But some of the prop stuff is very specific for all of the different edge cases for entering a map versus turning it off from a cutscene versus like loading in like a save state. Like it has a lot of edge cases. And so I'm wary to just go, this seems wrong, let's change it. But at the same time, it seems wrong and I'd like to understand it. Why does the animator matter? Like, why does it matter if it has an animator or not? On whether or not it gets an entity ID. Okay, kill this slime. Spawned a chest. And then the chest does disappear. The same way it does over here. It's a little bit snappy, but that's fine. Okay. Okay. I'm going to move on. I'm going to make a note for myself that I want to investigate this. Because I'd like to understand this, but the way that we'd have to do that is by testing a whole bunch of different functionality, like the bridge and a couple other things, and seeing what breaks and what doesn't break as we start modifying some of this. This feels very arbitrary, but okay. I don't feel like doing that right now. Not on stream, because it's going to be a lot of weird edge case checking, and it will be confusing even for me, and I feel like this has been confusing enough. So that is working. That functions. We have loot. Now setting some interact data and some prop data internally for the entity ID, and then it can spawn an interactable and spawn the prop, and then you can pick it up and the prop will despawn. There's a couple problems. Mainly that the interact doesn't appear instantly on the enemy's death. However, I think I'd like to try coming at this from a slightly different angle. Rather than making an interact to pick up, I think it would be more fun if the player could just walk on the tile with the object and then pick it up that way. I'm just double checking. I can't move onto this tile, and then we can. Ooh, here's a question. What happens if we defeat the enemy again? Does it respawn the drop? It does. Ah. But it fails to remove it the second time. That, I think, makes sense, because the entity manager would already have an entity ID with that identifier. In fact, I would have expected we would have gotten a notification about duplicate entity IDs. Yeah, repeated entity ID loot. Okay. I think that's okay, because this is a situation in which we're respawning this enemy. That won't happen normally. And if you leave and re-enter the map, it regenerates the whole entity manager for each room. So you shouldn't keep those entity IDs as you move between, even if they're the same, essentially. Okay. So I want to try working on an alternate version. I like this. I wanted to get this setup working exactly the same way as how we spawn interactables, just to kind of understand the problem space. Now that we have this structure, I'd like to try doing it differently, and instead try doing something where we still spawn the prop, I think. We don't set it to a wall, but instead of spawn interactable, we're going to see about modifying the tiles on enter abilities. Where are those? On enter ability. Tile data. Loop through. Load addressable ID. On ability load. Add the associated ability to the tile on enter ability list. That's pretty straightforward. Oh, this is literally just a string. Okay. I failed to hit copy fast enough. Okay. Okay, I figured it out. So if we just give it the ability ID, it'll spawn that on enter ability. The problem is that this is much simpler than an interact setup. For an interact, not only do we spawn it, we also do a bunch of work to populate a bunch of its ability effects with some metadata associated. Like, for example, which item we're picking up. So if we want to do an on enter ability, we will also need to configure it. The nice thing here is that it doesn't really change the way this system works. At the end of the day, when the player walks onto a tile, it still queues the responses in the ability response manager. So we just need to populate the data here in the same way that we're doing for spawn interactable. Okay. This is going to be a bit of an overhaul. Where does this data come in from again? Where does this get set? Transition tiles. This is the main source of these right now. When we walk onto specific tiles, these transition tiles are internally basically just an ability ID that get added to that tile's on enter abilities. That's it. End of sentence. And then we save the transition data separately. That's so interesting. Oh yeah. Crazy. So yeah, when we trigger the register scene transition, it doesn't get pre-populated the same way an interactability effect does. It just knows to check the tile for its transition data. So it doesn't have to populate anything. It's very contained. Yeah, this was made before the interact setup. I feel like if it was made after, I probably would have done something a little bit closer to this. Which for sure is a bit messy because we have to do a lot of like get components and children as part of our setup. Which is slow, for sure. I renamed the wrong one. All right. Okay, that's set up correctly. What if we didn't populate it? Yeah, I hate this already. So we could do it this way. But we would end up with a lot of prefabs for all the different variations. So the difference here is that we shouldn't be blocking this from being walkable, because we commented that part out. It's still spawning a chest, which doesn't make a ton of sense for a pickup. But now when we walk on it, it should be generating this loot cutscene instead of the interact one. And it should happen on enter. So that does work. Like, functionally, that would work. The problem is we need more information. Okay. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to put this back up here. This one can remain simple for the time being. Maybe eventually it gets more elaborate. But rather than rebuild the entire on-enter system, we're going to make a more complicated one via this function that can be used by the loot system. Where do all these live? These all live in the same spot, right? There's just one like core data that has a bunch of different data types associated with it. Yeah. So we're going to add this here because I think it's still potentially likely that we would want to update the current tile map system to use on enter data. And have a similar system to the interact. Rather than having a single string for the ability ID, it might want other information. What information it wants, I'm not so sure on. I think for now, just setting it up so it's basically identical in every way, and then we can remove the pieces that don't make sense. And then instead of adding to the interact, we add that ability that we've been modifying to the list of on-enter abilities. And that goes in there. And then this gets saved, and loot will just need to use the loot version. We'll need to use the on enter data. I don't love this name either, but I'm gonna potentially rework this before we start using it everywhere. Okay. I'm feeling drained, chat. I think if we can get this functional, I think this might be the end for me. The end of the stream. We're not far off. For whatever reason, I am feeling exhausted. That did fail. Errors. 2. We never actually set it up. Wow. Okay. So we got to go into here, and then on enter data, we'll basically do the same information here. This is the item we'd want to drop. Honestly, we don't even need the display name. Yeah, so this is where we'll start cutting things as we realize we don't need them. This version doesn't need a trigger name. It doesn't need a display name. I don't think it needs to display an entity or flag. It doesn't need a walkable type. So yeah, it gets cut down pretty heavily. The only information it really holds on to is the item that you're picking up. The only other thing, or there's a bunch of other things, but one thing I'd like to try doing is making it so the hide happens before the player input weight, so that it disappears as soon as you step on it. Which I believe it's after the player has fully been placed on the tile, so that should be fine. One other small thing I want to check is it feels like it's not positioned correctly. I think we got the position data wrong, but maybe that is correct. It just seems off from where I would expect to see it. Hype things up for the end here. Keep myself awake. Okay. Defeat this enemy. Does the chest spawn in the same spot? It does not. Okay, so we did get some positional data wrong. So this is spawned at -2, -2. Wait, custom offset is to -2. But its depth is -2, -2. Interesting. If we do add custom, we'll use a steel chest as well. We'll then look at the custom prop data, which is this set of this array. I think this might be no longer used actually. 0, 0. So then if we set this to -2, -2, the X is flipped. That's the Y? Yeah, the X is getting flipped. So the depth is what we're actually showing in the UI to make it more clear that like you're bringing it forward. But from an actual like what actually needs to go in, it's actually this value. So that's why it's so far off. It's been pushed 4 units in the wrong direction. So then if we come back into here, nope, mini slime. We come back into mini slime and look at the loot. Under prop data, this X should be 2, not -2. Oh, and then I want to clear this one. Clear. Clear. It didn't delete one for some reason. Okay. There's still some weird edge cases with the prop editor where it leaves props hanging after I've removed them. It doesn't clean them up properly. It like loses the reference. Okay, and spawn chest. I got something backwards. So this hide is hiding the UI. This is what's disabling the chest. Okay, and then technically this loot item pickup cutscene doesn't need to have any default information in it anymore. If we've done this correctly, it should also be being set up. So if we come back into here, clear this, clear this, this should work. Okay. Oh, it didn't. Oh, it never gets removed either. Okay. So close. Yet so far. So what do we need to do? We need to have the ability clean itself up. So we need some way of saying, after this ability is performed, remove this ability from the list of tile on enters. Okay. I can think of a couple of ways of doing that. It's interesting that by clearing... Oh, that's why. We're not actually setting the prop ID in the same way here. Now it should be clearing. Okay. So then it is just the needing to remove the on-enter ability. How is the pickup doing that? Not actually sure. Oh, neat. It never does get set to null. So the interact data is always there. I think it's just the required flag setup system. It like knows that it has a flag. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's... When we walk back up, we can't interact again. But it's something internally must just be setting one of the flags to say it's been picked up. And once that happens, that you can't interact with again, even though technically that tile has interact data associated with it. Just curious, if we go back to the old system, what was specifically... Okay, so we weren't setting any flag ID information for the interact. At least I didn't think we were. But we are for this one. So I just want to see if we go back to the version where the enemy drops something that you can interact with. If we do that interaction, and then without spawning another enemy, just... try walking up, interact, and then if we like walk away and then walk back up, yeah, okay, because we're not setting up a flag or anything, technically you can re-interact with it as many times as you want. Okay, so it had the same problem. Cool. I thought that that might be the case because we weren't setting anything, but that makes sense. So this doesn't have, on-enters don't have the same flag requirement system, it doesn't look like. Just can target. Which we can populate the can target system with these. Okay, yeah. Is that what's happening for the interact? Yeah, get flag requirement system. And then adding the required flags. Okay, so rather than removing the on-enter ability from the on-enter ability list, we could also just make it so that it is no longer triggerable once the flag has been set. But I think I'd rather just like clean it up rather than use the flag system in this particular case. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna call it here. I'm getting pretty exhausted, but I think we've made good progress. We did mostly complete the things I want to do. We have a skill item. We didn't end up making multiples. We do have that skill item gating the ability to unlock nodes by you at least having one of it. Again, I would like to have multiple skill items in the long term. And we have items dropping off of enemies, both as on-enter abilities and as interactables. I think I'll probably pick a lane. I do think I'm leaning more towards the on-tile enter so that you walk onto the tile to pick up whatever dropped. I like that version. So the other option is that like it just auto picks up, so on death it just triggers an ability, which would remove most of the on-enter stuff and the tile interactions entirely. We could just have it so that like when you kill the enemy, it just like auto picks it up, but I kind of like the pickup here. The only spot where that's going to be annoying is the moments when you have one turn left, you kill the enemy. Well, it would have to be your attack goes off and that attack is the final turn of the game, and then you die, but the loot is one tile away and you just can't step to pick it up. Yeah, that'll suck, but maybe that's just part of the experience. I don't know. And it seems lame, but we'll have to try it in practice. Maybe that doesn't happen very often, because it would need to be very specific on the timing. And even then, we could maybe add like a 1 second grace. Like, if you're about to run out of time and then an item drops, we give you that one extra turn to be able to pick it up. We could fudge the timer a little bit. Yeah, there's ways of solving that. Anyways, I like the on-enter version. I need some cleanup to remove the on-enter after it's triggered once. But otherwise, I think this is good. We did what we wanted to do today. There's just a little bit of cleanup that I'll probably do off camera. For now, though, this is going to be Tolhi signing out. Later, folks.